So I'm going to present this paper, which has just come out in Management Science, and it's called, as you can see, Prismatic Trust, the Interplay of Social Structure and Networking Behavior, with my colleagues, Pepe Soda, Mike Park, Bill, and Manny Subramani. So we are delighted to finally see it in print. And of course, it's a very long process. Before I dive into the paper itself, what I'm going to do is give you a flavor of how I got here. What's my journey been? And I know that Oliver had suggested that that might be a direction that I use for this talk. So I'm going to start with the antecedents, if you like, of my trust research, conception and trust research as well as network research. So I did my PhD at MIT, where my advisor was Venkat. You may have seen some of Venkat's work. He's very well published. And my dissertation was on information technology mediated inter-firm relationships, because Venkat was an IT scholar. And so I decided to look at IT as part of strategy, because I was a strategy scholar. And the principal theoretical framework was going to be transaction cost theory, because TC theory talks about integration. That's, it's fundamentally predicated on efficient firm boundaries, where you should draw your firm boundaries. And so in the context I was looking at, the question I was looking at, TC theory was the obvious go-to theoretical framework. And the assumptions of TC theory, as all of you are very familiar with, are that uncertainty is high, and I'm simplifying a little bit here, not too much, a little bit. Uncertainty is always high. And very importantly, you have to be on guard against the potential opportunism of your exchange partner, which means you always have to worry that the exchange partner will stab you in the back, right? You always have to worry. And then the unit of analysis is a transaction taken singly. So one transaction at a time. And as I reviewed TC theory and as I thought about TC theory, I wondered, what were the implications? What would the implications be if we relaxed some of these, rather strong assumptions that underlie TC theory? And the most obvious one to me, of course, was that we must always assume that our exchange partner might stab us in the back. But what if we were to treat opportunism, or its obverse, trust, as a variable and not as a constant? Not that you're always worried about your exchange partner stabbing you in the back, and so you have to take steps to guard yourself, safeguard yourself against that. But suppose you could vary trust. Similarly, suppose you could vary uncertainty. So uncertainty, of course, in the TC formulation is both primary uncertainty and behavioral uncertainty. So there's a little bit of trust kind of mixed in there, if you like. But again, primary uncertainty is high in the Williamson formulation. What if it isn't necessarily high? And the third assumption, which was we treat each transaction singly, one at a time, seemed to me to be, obviously out of step with empirical reality. Of course, what goes on in one transaction spills over into other transactions. In other words, your relationships with other firms are not independent with your relationships with other firms. So these are not to be, considered necessarily independently, because of course they aren't. And that was the basis of my research stream, my research trajectory, systematically relaxing the assumptions of transaction cost theory. So the first elements of the theory which I was looking at what are the outcomes as well as the antecedents. So in this framework, what are the causes that lead up to the relationship, and what are the outcomes of the relationship? And I've talked about trust, which I'll talk about a little bit more, of course, and networks, which I'll talk about a little bit more, of course. But my early research also systematically varied uncertainty. So I looked at how primary uncertainty was varying, and had a couple of papers and a theory paper as well on that too. And then I looked at IT-mediated relationships, which were, of course, part of my dissertation. But what I want to talk about, one more. I also looked at specific relational phenomena, such as alliances and mergers and acquisitions. So all, the theory and the relaxation of the assumptions of the theory were applied, if you will, to those specific instances in general. So it's a phenomenon-based examination, if you like. So one area of my research program looked at the phenomena of mergers and acquisitions and alliances, where, of course, trust and networks apply to a great extent. But then I focused front and center on both trust and networks. And I've been, obviously by the way, this game is a game of luck. However much you might like to think that you are responsible for everything, you're not, right? It's a game of luck, and I've been very lucky. So I did a great deal of work on trust, and continue to do a great deal of work on trust. And because I was in the strategy space, and I was going to get evaluated for tenure by strategy scholars, I focused on the firm and on inter-firm relationships for the most part. And so most of my work was at the level of the firm. It's only when I became full that I said, what the heck? I'm just going to do what I'm interested in doing. And so I looked at relationships between individuals as well, and teams as well. Right. So, note to anyone out there, just do what you're interested in doing, what's fun. Right. And so I was looking at cross-national contexts as well. Much more recently, national trust, interorganizational trust, the paper that Oliver mentioned, which was with Bill in Org Science in '98, and within the organization as well. And we had a special issue on trust with Bill and Vincenzo Pironi, which talked about some of those things. And then my network research trajectory grew out of that same idea, which is, what if the transaction is not to be considered singly, but what if it's part of a network of relationships? What then? And so, again, I've been extraordinarily lucky here as well. I looked at a number of papers looking at relationships, network relationships across firms. And as I said, across teams, and teams are, by the way, a quasi-organization. So that, fulfill the description of the firm. And I was able to, sell that when I was going up for tenure. I'm sorry, this was post-full. I went lucky enough to get full in 2003. So this was actually after I got full. and individuals. So, much more recently, individuals, and this paper, which I'm going to talk about as well, but also whole networks, which is another dimension. And I've looked at whole networks in the business group context, and also in the healthcare context. And I have a couple of papers there. So that's the origin of my research trajectory. And I'm going to dive straight into the current paper, which, by the way, is part of a larger project on network trust that Bill and I and Beppe Soda have been engaged in. And with Oliver, as I said, we are doing a project on an edited volume. And I'm going to take a fairly a fairly extreme view here, by the way, because I want to make the contrast. And I myself, with Bill, have worked on relational trust. But here I'm going to make the case for network trust. And of course, the paper that I'm going to present sees a kind of network trust, which is prismatic trust. And I'll talk about what that means presently. But here is the distinction from relational trust, which is dyadic. And most of the work in our field has been on dyadic trust, including, as I said, some of mine as well. And the network setting has not been given as much attention as we believe that it needs. However, there have been hints over time that the network is an essential context for trust as well. So, very famously, Bellucci talked about culture and essentially a culture of trust and in that network setting. Goldman, very famously, a network research scholar, sees closure, which is a network form where all the ties are connected to all the nodes are connected to one another, and trust develops in that context, in that network structure, is the key idea. More recently, there's been work on what we label network pathways. So these are trust pathways within the network. So essentially, if I trust Bill and Bill trusts Oliver, then I trust Oliver as well. So an indirect network connection of trust and a pathway to trust through the network. And these are some of the terms that the network literature uses. And if you are reciprocal, or if you have transitivity, so what I just mentioned was transitivity. I trust Bill, Bill trusts Oliver, I trust Oliver. And Bert and Knez have, famously talked about third-party trust, which is essentially what I was talking about as well, in terms of an indirect trust tie. But really, beyond this, there hasn't been a systematic effort at fleshing out the nature and the concept of network trust. And so Bill and I with Beppe, Bill and I have been working on trust and networks together, but never brought the two things together. Right? We were working separately on trust and networks, if you like. And so the irony is that how do you expect the literature to combine trust and networks when even the folks like Bill and me who work on trust and networks have been working on them separately? So one day we said, why shouldn't we be the people doing this? And so we took on that challenge. Okay, so I'm very aware that we have a hard stop in 40 minutes from now. And so I'm going to go a little bit quicker, but please ask questions in the course of the presentation, right? So this is, very much the style that, as you know, we all are familiar with. So, as I said, we decided that we would do it together. And in this 2021 chapter, Bill, Beppe, and I defined the concept of what we call network trust. And in this paper, we have essentially done an empirical test of network trust, which we call, also known as, prismatic trust. Right? So prismatic trust, if you like, is a form of network trust. And I'll define exactly what it is that we mean by prismatic trust and how it's different from other kinds of trust. And as it says, it's very much not relational trust. So relational trust is dyadic trust. That means you trust. And obviously, this is trust in a work context. This is not trust in a familial context. But these are ties such as buyer-supplier ties, ties among co-workers in an organization, any kind of business relationship. And it's a single person. The object of trust is a single node. And that's the key idea. And this is where most of the trust literature has focused. Prismatic trust and network trust are not generalized trust either. So it doesn't mean that we are trusting everyone in the network, although there is some work that sees network trust as trusting everyone in the network. And nor is it institutional trust, where we trust even more broadly, and not either network pathway trust, which I just spoke about, which is third-party trust, indirect trust, right? I trust Bill, Bill trusts Oliver. So it's not that at all. So what is it? So here's a picture of a network. Notice that the four nodes on this top left side are also part of the network, but they're disconnected. They're part of the same network, but they are isolates, right? That doesn't mean that they're not part of a little bit of a contradiction, but they are in fact part of the network. And this would be the pink line here is the classic dyadic trust perspective. And here is the network pathway or the trust pathway trust perspective, also called second-hand trust. And this would be the truster, 23, trusting the trustee, which is 32, probably not so many steps away, because obviously it gets very weak the more the nodes that you have to pass through, but that's the concept. But the more important idea is that this is what we are looking at. So how do we get, or how do we understand, or how do we explain that in a network, and in particular an online network, how do we understand 23 trusting 34 when they're not directly nor indirectly connected? When they're neither directly nor indirectly connected. And that's the concept of prismatic trust. So how does it work? I've just said that, and it's interesting and important because, of course, online networks can be very, very large. And so we are looking at this concept of trust, this conception of trust, which is massively scalable. You can have, thousands and hundreds of thousands of trustors, right? Which is very interesting and different. And so the accumulation of trust, if you like. I'm sorry, the bullets aren't going sequentially, so forgive me for that. So the key point, of course, as I mentioned, is that it's not network pathway trust, but it's something that's based on signals from the network. And this harks back to Podolny's work, which we acknowledge, where Podolny sees networks as prisms or pipes. And of course, they can be both, right? So pipes means that the affect or whatever is traveling through the network travels through the connections, travels through the links between the nodes, among the nodes. And prisms is a different conception which we use, where we see the network as, I would say, prismatically refracting signals. So that's what a prism does, as you know. So it's a refraction of signals, and the trust door acts as a spectator. So that's a key idea. The trustor is a spectator in this process. The trustor watches and looks at the signals and draws conclusions about whom to trust based on those signals the trustor is able to see. Which, of course, assumes that there's a great deal of observability. I'll talk about that a little bit later as well. So we are assuming that everything is transparent, everything is observable, and that's how the trustor can draw inferences about whom to trust, because they see these signals. So before we proceed, I want to very quickly, and of course we are always going to be very tight on time, so I'm going to rush through some of these things. So this is the context. And the context, this is a pseudonym, Easy Trade. The context is one of social trading. And what is social trading? So social trading means that you are able to message people on the network. So any trader, and there are millions of traders, any trader is able to message any other trader on the network. And typically the idea is that you as a trader can ask for advice, can say, what do you think? And the trader is able to give advice. But the most important notion here, which I want to focus on, is that there are three kinds of networks in this space. And the first kind of network is what's known as a following network. And a following network is that you as a trader can choose anyone to follow. And what that means is whenever that trader that you're following executes a trade, you will be informed, right? So that's one kind of network. The second kind of network is a messaging network. So you can message people, they can message you back. So we can create a network of who messages whom in this setting as well. But the key idea here is that of copy trading is the concept known as copy trading, which is a fascinating idea. And that's our dependent variable, as it turns out. And copy trading means that if I designate a certain trader to copy, whatever the trader does on their portfolio is automatically executed on my portfolio. Right? Let me say that again. If I designate a certain trader and I can say, I want 10% of my portfolio to copy Bill. And so whatever Bill does on 10% of my portfolio, those trades are automatically executed. And we looked at this, together, and we said, boy, can we really have a better setting of trust where you have the risk that comes from, stocks going higher or lower, where you have dependence, where you have vulnerability, all the classic conceptions of what trust means, right? You can be hammered because your stock might go down and you are trusting that particular trader. So you're vulnerable to the actions of that particular trader. And FYI, and this is an aside, we spoke to the CEO of this company. So we're in touch with them. We're trying to get more data from them and so on. So we spoke to the CEO of the company and we said, we are conceptualizing copy trading as trust. And I'll never forget what the CEO's reaction was. He said, "That's brilliant." And I said, I am vindicated. Never let anyone say that business school research doesn't matter. Because if the CEO says, what you're doing is sensible and worthwhile, we are very much vindicated. Okay. So let me stop for a second here and ask if you have questions.
That's great, because there are at least 3 in the chat that I want to read out to you, or
Yes,
you can,
please.
of course, follow along. So Bilal asked the first question. They're both they're more conceptual, right? Not so much about your empirical setting. So the question is, does the shape of the network matter for prismatic trusts? For example, there's a difference between a network with dense many connection versus a sparsely connected network. So does the shape of the relationships matter?
It turns out it does not matter, because we are not so much, of course, we're looking at structure as well. And to that extent, it's an independent variable. So to that extent, quote, it does matter. But of course, our theory extends across networks of all shapes and all forms and all structures.
So to ask a follow-up clarifying question, prismatic trust is just due to a person being part of your network. So you can think of it as a binary thing. Either a person is part of your network or the actor is not.
Right, of course. I mean, the starting assumption is that you are able to observe all the interactions on the network. So not just the fact that you're part of it, you're part of this completely transparent network where the performance of the traders is transparent, where who follows whom is transparent, and who copies whom is transparent as well. So the transparency is critical as a foundational element of the signals and the prismatic trust outcome.
Great, thank you. And Ting wants to know, the small world theory suggests that every person is only 6 degrees of separation away from any other individual, meaning that everyone is indirectly connected, even if we aren't aware of all the possible connections. How does that study, or your study, account for incorporate that idea?
Yeah.
I guess the question is, where does the network end? If you can think of like everyone being part of a network.
So, of course, that's a big question always. What are the boundaries of the network? Of any network, we have to have a boundary that makes sense conceptually and empirically. So that's always a question. And in our setting, of course, it's everyone who is a member of the Easy Trade online social trading network. So that's pretty straightforward. But the other question was a more something we are centrally kind of concerned with, which is that does this still apply if you're not even indirectly connected? So not everyone has to be connected. I mean, we are pushing that logic to the extreme to make the point that it's not the connections that create trust. So that's a fundamental idea. You might be connected, 6 degrees away, but you really are not going to, trust someone who's 6 degrees away. So trust falls off quite rapidly. So I trust Bill trusts Oliver. Oliver, you might trust a friend who trusts a friend who trusts a friend. So I'm not going to trust that, third level friend. Very unlikely. So, but we are extending that, we are pushing that concept to the extreme to make the point that you don't have to be even indirectly connected to create prismatic trust.
Great. Thanks for clarifying. A couple more questions, and then we should probably move on.
Yeah.
Sijun has a follow-up to Ting's question. He was curious whether network trust could also be a form of trust via indirect ties. I think you just addressed that, you said no, or at least the prismatic form of trust that you're interested in is not about indirect ties. I cautiously think one can use network as a prism in their decision to trust others because their and the target's networks are connected.
So we control, so empirically we control for that as well. And by the way, FYI, since we have 3 different networks in our setting, we use the copying network as the DV and the messaging and the following networks as IVs, as independent variables, not instrumental variables, independent variables. So we are, avoiding the endogeneity that most network research has, which is that the dependent variable and the independent variables are measured on the same network. So, that's another thing. And then, as it turns out, we are also controlling for distant connections between the trustor and the trustee, and we find the effect holds despite controlling for indirect connections. So, we very specifically want to make an extreme argument because we want to establish that prismatic trust is not at all, not necessarily, even without a single indirect connection, it still exists, is the point.
And finally, Z wants to know more about the mechanism behind prismatic trust, I think.
So that I am coming to.
Okay. So Z, you've got to be a bit more patient.
Yeah, all right. Okay.
Let's move on.
Okay. So, so this is the context, and as I said, we are looking at copy trading as a DV, but you can also trade by yourself. I'm going to move quickly through this because I've talked about most of it already. And this is the formal DV. So the formal DV is how many copiers does the focal trader have? And we call it trust accumulation, right? It's a number of people who trust the T, the focal trader. As I said, we have 2 other networks as well, but everything is public. You can only copy 100 traders, but here's an interesting idea, which is that traders that are highly copied have incentives to increase the number of copiers, right? So of course, the platform, the goal of the platform is to increase the number of trades because that's how they earn money. That's how they make money on the platform, by the bid-ask spread, right? The difference between buying the stock and selling the stock. So that tiny commission is what they own, is what they collect. And they want to massively increase the number of transactions. And so they incentivize people to be copied. So now we are in a little bit of a gray area here. So people may be doing it, getting copiers just to make more money rather than because they want people to trust them. And so we control for that as well. And here is a key independent variable. And that independent variable is what we call positivity, which is networking action. The action of networking behavior, networking action. And we look at the messages that the focal trader, the copy trader, sends to other traders, and we look at the content of the messaging to look for positive words. And there's a science to that specifically. Okay. But the first hypothesis is based on the following network. And here the idea is that if you are followed by highly followed traders, then we believe that's a signal of trust, of status. And that signal of status is a signal of competence and therefore trust. So as we know, the famous ABI framework of Mayer et al., which is ability and benevolence and integrity. And those are the classic dimensions of trust, and being followed by highly followed traders, we see as an indication, as a signal of competence. And so our first hypothesis is that the higher your status, the more you're followed by highly followed people, the more people will copy you, the more trust accumulation will occur. The second hypothesis is, as I said, the networking behavior idea, the action idea, and here again, as I said, are you expressing benevolence? And this is another major dimension of trust. Are you seen as benevolent? And so these are posts that the focal trader makes on the messaging boards of other traders who might eventually be copyists. Might. The point is, we are not looking for them to actually be copiers. All we're looking for is for the spectator, who will eventually be the copier, to observe the kind of sentiment that the focal trader is expressing on the messaging board. Right? So notice that even the notion of status is an observation by the spectator trader. So the spectator trader is able to view how many followers you have who themselves are highly followed. And the second big variable, independent variable, is what is the degree of benevolence that you exhibit in the messages that you post on others' boards. And again, the person who's finally doing the copying is not necessarily the person on whose messaging board the focal trader is posting these benevolent messages. They are just spectators. And the third is I'm sorry, this thing is all out of sync. The third is really just an interaction effect, which is, well supported in our network world. High status actors are seen as very credible, and when high status actors engage in benevolent behavior, their actions are much more credible. And of course, this is very consistent as well with classic sociology, structure and action working together, the famous work of Giddens. And so that is our third hypothesis. The data are from Easy Trades. We've got 38 weeks of data, 28,000 active traders, which gives us 680,000 trader by week. Observations, number of copiers is lagged. The status, are you followed by highly followed people, is best captured by the famous Bonesich centrality, which is eigenvector centrality. And positivity is measured by this program called Luke, pronounced Luke. And we are looking at the discussion boards and the specific words that exhibit benevolence. And if you are higher than the mean, then you are, we treat that as a sign of positivity in your actions. So here are some quotes. So the underlined words, by the way, are words that Luke sees as benevolent or likability words. So just look at the words for a second. So essentially, the program picks up those kinds of words, and there's a specific set of positivity enhancing or displaying words. Okay, so here's the analysis. So it's a standard OLS, but it's got both weak and trader fixed effects. So we want to control for variations in the week. We also want to control for, traders being better, say, at trading than other traders. We want to just make sure that we use fixed effects for that. But then we also have a number of controls. As I said, we control for traders that are directly linked and have a robustness check for indirectly linked traders. Because again, the point is to establish that prismatic trust works even when they are not directly or even indirectly connected. Very importantly, we control for performance. Because you'd say, of course, you are dealing with financial outcomes. You want to follow traders, you want to copy traders that are making more money than other traders who are performing better. And of course, the point of our story is that it's not just performance, but it's prismatic trust. Right? And so we control for performance, which, as it turns out, not surprisingly, is significant. We control for risk because the platform also flags traders or assigns the degree of risk across traders. We control for the overlap of networks. So are you in my following network as well, in my communication network as well? We control for the incentives. And then as a supplementary analysis, we use a dynamic panel model, Ariano Bond, which has a lag DV as an instrument. And so here we are also now controlling for time-varying unobservables, so which are not picked up by fixed effects, right? So you might have traders that are becoming better over time, and the fixed effect won't pick that up. Addresses endogeneity in many forms. It's a state-of-the-art methodology as well. Okay, so here are the results, and I'm just going to show you that they are significant. The three hypotheses are all significant. Interestingly, though, the overlap of the following and copying network of the focal trader is also significant. So if the people who are following you are also copying you, then that will show up here. The same with the discussion and copying network. But also very interestingly, we are making sure that we control for those things. So the effects we are looking at are above and beyond those effects. Here's the performance variable. So this is the decile of trader performance. So we put that in, and unsurprisingly, that is also significant. So of course, people are looking at the performance of traders, and then these are just the number of discussion comments as well. This is the interaction effect. So, quite a strong interaction effect between structure and action, i.e. networking behavior, as well as status as network structure. This is the supplementary analysis where, everything is also supported with the dynamic panel Ariano Bond lagged DV. And here's the lagged DV, which not surprisingly is significant as well. Okay.
Before we move on to the discussion, can we maybe handle two questions?
Absolutely.
I want to get back to the question about reputation. I think, rather than reputation, you focus on status, right, as a arguably related mechanism, right?
Yeah.
So this question is your type of trust about reputation? Someone is famous for his or her excellent performance. Due to that reputation, I want to copy his or her way of trading. Many people copy Buffett's choice of stocks.
Yeah. So, that's, a fundamental part of our theorizing, which is, of course, performance, reputation is going to be a factor in copying. And that's what we've controlled for here, and that's significant. The whole point is that the effects of status and sentiments, network trust, prismatic trust, exist despite controlling for performance. right? I mean, that's the whole point of the story. Of course, that's going to be a factor. You'd expect it to be a factor. I would be very surprised if it wasn't significant, right? In fact, this is a very positive sign that the traders are rational. Of course, you're going to look at performance, but we are able to show that these effects exist above and beyond the control for performance.
But you don't see reputation as yet another aspect of prismatic trust, because reputation information is even available to outsiders of the network?
So reputation from what is the point, right, Oliver? I think
I
heard you say reputation from doing well. So that's performance.
And is that information on traders
it's
available to outsiders?
It's available to everyone on the network.
On the network, okay.
Actually on the network. Yeah.
So you could probably argue that it is yet then another signal that is picked up by network members, and thus another mechanism.
Which we are arguing, which is why it's here as a control.
All right. Okay, so Badri asks about like even more nuanced trust measures that you probably haven't done empirically, but maybe you have some thoughts. Do you observe / anticipate different behavioral manifestations of trust in this type of trust? I'm thinking of continued trading despite losing money in first round trading.
Yeah. Very good question, that's our next project, by the way. Not that we don't have the data to examine that. So we're looking at stickiness. So how long do you stick with a trader you're copying? And what kinds of performance changes or what kinds of ups and downs in your portfolio would you be able to overcome if you are sticking with a trader? And so what explains relationship length, if you like. So how long do you trust? And we can, of course, measure that, and we have the data for that. But we are, engaging in discussions with the company and maybe going to be able to do an experiment where we tweak some elements and see if, changes occur. And we're looking at relationship length as a fundamental dependent variable in our next step.
Great. Thanks, Ax. I think we can proceed to the discussion now.
Okay. So, as I said at the start, these two literatures have been like ships passing in the night. So, and the irony is that they've been ships passing through the night in both Bill and my research streams. So even with our own heads, there are two ships passing in the night. And we finally said, what the heck? Obviously they're connected. And so this, network trust idea is an outcome of that. But I think the point we wanted to make here is to really, stretch that concept of prismatic trust and network trust more broadly beyond just indirect connections. So, of course, indirect connections within the network would lead to trust. I trust Bill, Bill trusts Oliver. But here we are pushing that envelope, really quite far out by saying that treating the network as a prism where you're not even indirectly connected, but are still able to trust is really the very novel kind of concept that we want to put forward here. That all you need is a set of signals. And as the world becomes more and more online, and as these online networks become more and more transparent, which, of course, they are to a great extent, the concept of prismatic trust, even without direct or indirect connections, will begin to become even more powerful. So that's the real idea, the notion of the signals of behavior and structure as giving you the signals and the ability to trust people you have never had any kind of connection with. But of course, it means that we need networks that are extremely transparent, where observability is very high, because we want observability on the performance dimension, we want observability on the network structure dimension, we want observability on the networking behavior dimension as well in this specific setting. And there may be limitations to that extreme transparency kind of assumption. So that might be a boundary condition. But we see this as something that's quite novel, and so we are very excited about pushing this forward as we are doing, as I mentioned earlier, in this edited volume.